The budget talks with Vice President Biden and the congressional leadership have begun, and I think the real question is going to be, what is the population of options that they're going to be willing to consider? Right now, unfortunately, at least, it seems that perhaps they're narrowing away from some of the longer term fiscal challenges like Social Security and Medicare and tax reform and towards much shorter term fiscal options. And I think that might be a mistake.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's going to be a challenge on fiscal policy going forward, is that the smartest solutions, the largest policy levers that make the most economic sense also happen to be the most difficult political choices for our policymakers to admit we need to follow through on. So everyone knows that the spending side pressures are primarily through Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, because those are the programs that are scheduled to have large increases in spending over time because of demographic change combined with rising per capita health costs. At the same time, on the tax side, it's become increasingly clear that we're going to need to do something to raise revenue as a share of GDP. All of the bipartisan commissions and task forces that have met on this issue have acknowledged that and made it very clear that we need both tax side and spending side solutions. So it's going to be interesting to see how far they get in these bipartisan talks at coming to some sort of compromise with these politically very difficult policy options.
And I think we understand that because of the impending debt ceiling need to vote on that, there's going to be pressure and time pressure that'll probably prevent them from reaching some grand bargain. I think the real question is, what do they jettison to get this debt ceiling increased? And I think ideally, if they can agree on those big entitlement programs and major tax reform, they'll at least institute a process by which those are still part of the game. I think one of the fears is that they have some sort of process reform that still makes it easy to duck those long-term issues. And that's what we really need to focus on, that they don't have a way to duck those long-term issues, that the process is not just focused on deficit levels in the year 2015, that we really do something more about the long-term drivers.
Well, and I think, in fact, that if they can come to some sort of agreement on a process to come up with these harder policy choices going forward, that they can start to work on building trust between, among each other by not taking things off the table, but seeing how much they can put on the table. Because all of these different budget process reforms that might be put in place, they're only going to be as effective as the universe of policies that can be controlled by those processes. So I think that the negotiations in the coming weeks are actually critical, even if we don't get to specific policy choices about Social Security, Medicare, or tax reform. Just in coming to some agreement about how are we going to get to those tougher choices, and what are we going to be willing to consider getting better discipline on.
And the main thing is not to have process reforms that wind up exempting at least these big entitlement programs, or exempting revenues or tax expenditures. That even if they punt in a way on these long-term issues, the process will still allow those long-term issues to come in order to achieve the targets or the goals of whatever reform is put in place in order to pave the way for a debt ceiling vote.
Right. It's not going to encourage bipartisanship if the Democrats on their part say to the Republicans, okay, we're for discipline, budget discipline, as long as you don't include Social Security or Medicare benefits. And on the Republicans' part, they can't say to the Democrats, we're all for process reform and reining in deficits as long as tax increases are off the table. So
as long as we're only focused on short-term spending cuts.
That's right. So I think both sides have to put a little bit more on the table, even if it's just in the context of budget process reform, for us to make any progress on the fiscal issue in general.
Right.